Well, look, we've signed a new policy targets agreement. We believe the current framework has served New Zealand well, so there's been only minor adjustments to the agreement. Two changes. One has been to express, we're going to continue to require the bank to focus on price stability. We're expressing that as focusing on 2%. Rather than the range of 1 to 3, and that's simply to provide more clarity about inflation expectations. It doesn't signal tighter policy. And the second change is to reflect some of the lessons from the global financial crisis, where we put a stronger focus on financial stability, which would enable the bank to lean against the kind of build-up in house prices and credit growth that we saw in the last cycle.
So that basically means it would have, under this PTA, you'd expect the bank to have raised the LCR sooner.
Well, that would be a matter for the Governor, but I think it demonstrates an understanding around the world from the global financial crisis that central banks probably could have taken more notice of the sharp rises in house prices. But I think it's important to understand that's to some extent the fighting the last war. So it's lessons from the global financial crisis, but the challenges ahead are not the same as they were back in 2007, 2008.
You haven't abandoned the...
Looking at what's in there, most of it seems to be stuff that's happening anyway and simply making it a bit more explicit than implicit.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the framework has served New Zealand well, and there's benefit in consistency. So we want to, we're not changing the rules. The monetary policy framework is staying in place. We've made some slight adjustments to it.
But you haven't gone to a point target. You've still got a 1 to 3% band. So what's the value added by that language about focusing on the 2%?
Well, it's simply about inflation expectations. That as people look ahead, they know that the bank is clearly focused around the 2%. The fact is the range of inflation measures put inflation at about that rate now, so it doesn't signal any particular change.
What's the point of adding a requirement to monitor asset prices? The bank already keeps a pretty beady eye on house prices in particular. Would you expect that to change its behaviour in any way?
Well, I wouldn't expect in the short term, but I think it is a lesson learned from the last cycle where there was a view that asset prices didn't matter quite so much. I think now we're familiar with the economic destruction that can arise when asset prices rise too fast and then crash quickly.
Well, likewise, I mean, the bank's been pretty focused on financial stability, particularly since the GFC. What's the value added by requiring to do so in the context of making monetary policy?
Well, I think you're right. It's reflecting what's happening, what's been happening. And I think making it clear that that is part of the monetary policy framework.
Is there a suggestion here to go ahead with macroprudential tools?
Well, we'll be continuing to work on developing those tools. The Reserve Bank, New Zealand Reserve Bank, is among the foremost of central banks and working out how you would use them. It's certainly not straightforward. If you're going to use more tools, then you need to work out who are the decision makers, what are the criteria by which they're going to make decisions, in a framework that's somewhat similar to inflation targeting, and that's got quite some way to go.
Did you consider broadening? You mentioned who are the decision makers there, and there was some suggestion if you were serving you that perhaps move to a committee model rather than a single choice. Did you consider that?
Oh no, not in this context. I mean, it's a different argument about the institutional arrangements, and there's been over the last 10 years 2 or 3 significant inquiries into how the decisions are made, and people have come to the conclusion that in a small economy, the single decision maker has been the best model. That's not to say it can't be considered in the future. The new governor may form a view about it, but I don't think it would change the nature of the decisions.
Is there an implication in this that policy has been too loose and inflation too high over the last 10 years, and that the bank was too slow to respond to the housing boom?
Oh, no, I don't. No, there's not that implication. I think in retrospect we can always argue about what the bank should or shouldn't have done to prevent in New Zealand and in other countries the kind of wreckage that we've seen. But we are writing a PTA that reflects some of those lessons, but isn't preoccupied with the past. What we've got to do here is anchor future inflation expectation and continue to anchor them, and focus on the underlying issues, which are not so much monetary policy as the fundamental competitiveness.
Did you give any consideration at all to writing anything about the currency in there, since it's such an issue at the moment?
No, not serious consideration. There's been discussion around the world, but there's really no viable way to target the currency. The bank's got. We've learned from experience inflation targeting is now a pretty refined kind of process. The exchange rate is a symptom as much as a cause. There's a whole separate discussion there about exchange rates. Bear in mind the bank does have capacity in its legislation to intervene with the exchange rate. The government actually has capacity in the legislation to direct intervention. The bank has in the past talked about the conditions under which it would intervene, and they're pretty limited. So that framework's all in place for what might be regarded as extreme events with the currency.
You mentioned the old war, that was credit growth. What's the new war that they're facing?
Oh, look, the new war is just growth. You're seeing around the world central banks getting into some pretty innovative policy making because they're pulling on levers they've never pulled before to try and get some growth, effectively trying to get interest rates to zero. In some places interest rates are actually negative. So the issues in New Zealand at the moment are not to do with rapid credit growth. Credit growth's around about zero, just above. It's actually to do with competitiveness and growth, and it's good to see from the figures over the last 6 months that we're on track for moderate 2 to 3% growth with relatively low inflation.
So does this PTA deal with the new war of trying to find growth by perhaps allowing for a lower interest rate environment, but using those macroprudential tools to stop asset price bubbles in certain parts of the economy, like housing?
Well, look, it's consistent with an environment where we need to work harder to get growth. We can't wait for any big wave to come through and pick us up. We can't borrow our way to wealth. So this PTA is about stability on the inflation front, while we focus strongly on competitiveness so that we can earn a living in the world. Competitiveness via the fiscal front.
What's that? It would have to be competitiveness via the fiscal front, wouldn't it? Or a low interest rate environment.
Competitiveness focused on microeconomic reform, so businesses can make investment decisions and do better out of those investment decisions. We've signalled our fiscal track pretty clearly, and that's consistent with lower interest rates than would otherwise be the case.
What do you make of the suggestions that we've seen this week from Gwyneth Doyle and others that perhaps we need to be getting into some of that kind of innovative monetary policy making ourselves?
Yeah, I just don't agree with them. There can be a misunderstanding of what's happening in, say, the US. What they are trying to do is get interest rates lower, and they're willing to do almost anything to get them lower. We're not in the position where we need to do that because we've got some growth, we've got employment growth, unlike the US. The Reserve Bank has at its disposal the interest rate tool, and it will, when considering setting interest rates, take into account the relationship between economic growth and the inflation rate. So those other countries are in an extreme position, and they're using tools as a last resort.
Reasons why we're ending up with a very strong dollar, which seems to be a growing consensus that it's actually strengthening such growth as we have.
Yeah, but the driver of our exchange rate is as much to do with the relatively positive outlook for our economy compared to, say, the US economy. Now, over the next couple of years, if the policy in the US has a positive effect, growth there will pick up, interest rates will pick up, and it may well be that the exchange rate drops back.
So in the meantime, couldn't we also be doing things to mitigate that? Well, they don't like what McKibben suggested.
Well, we are, and that is we're focusing on the basic competitiveness of the New Zealand economy, because that is the underlying issue, just as it is right across Europe, where if you're sitting in Greece it feels like a massive exchange rate problem. The answer to that is they have to improve their competitiveness. We have a much less of those pressures, but we still want to focus on our competitiveness. I mean, there's no free lunches with exchange rates. You can, even if you could find a way of bringing it down, say from 80 cents to 70 cents, it's almost pretty much impossible to sustain that over time, and even large economies like Japan have found they can't, and they've spent trillions of yen trying to lower their exchange rate. In fact, just last night they commented on it themselves. And even if you could succeed in all that, then the pressures pop up somewhere else, either as higher inflation or people having a cut in their standard of living. So there's no free lunch.
You said there was no implication that the previous policy was too loose, but is there an implied message here that you want policy to be tighter?
No, we just want to be clear about inflation expectations, and they have over the last decade drifted up slightly, flattening out a bit now, and we think that's about right. And so if there's clarity about that 2% target, we think it'll sort of hold them where they are rather than let them drift up further.